hello everyone, and welcome back to the Pink Flame of Liberty. I do want to say right off on the top end here that you can always contact me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com, and please do check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. We kind of have a potpourri of topics to address today, but we're gonna start with a good old-fashioned rant. As many of you may know, my husband is the state chair of the Libertarian Party of Colorado. I'm the national secretary of the National Libertarian Party. Definitely a political couple. And obviously, we're in election year right now in 2022. So what happens the other day, and boy, this just burns my biscuits, okay, to put it politely, to put it in a radio-friendly way. So the other day, my husband gets a call, and I'm not going to mention names here. I'm not even going to mention the office this person is running for, because it's really not about this particular person. And I also want to make it clear, I'm going to have a lot of criticisms of the Republican Party in this show, but I want to make it clear it's of the party apparatchik. It's not of your everyday next door neighbor Republican. It's not of you. Unless you support these kinds of tactics, then, you know, shoes and fittings come into play. But I'm talking about the party apparatchik, whom I have a lot of disdain for, particularly because I deal with ballot access issues and just dirty dealing. And I think all of us realize that the power brokers in the political system today, be it right, left, whatever, they're corrupt. A great many of them are corrupt. That's not to say there aren't any decent people, but we're speaking in generality. So, as happens nearly every even year, because they're election years, my husband, well, it doesn't happen to him every year. It happens to the Libertarian Party every even year, all over the country. So my husband gets a call from a candidate that is running, a Republican candidate that's running, and asks him if we will pull our candidate out of the race so that we don't harm them. Like, the absolute gall of that phone call. It's like, oh, you guys are so adorable. I know you're a political party and all, but what's most important is me. What's most important is my party. What's most important is that I win. So I know your whole existence. You're a political party. You're here to run candidates. You know, you're cute and all adorable. Pat, pat, pat on the head. But will you just withdraw your candidate? I cannot even imagine having the nerve to make that phone call. And it quite obviously was at the direction of the party superiors. I'm going to step back for a second because I want to tell you something else very, very annoying that happened. And in this case, it's inevitable to mention some names, but the names I'm going to specifically mention, it's going to be positive. So, in the Douglas County, which is where I reside, I live in Castle Rock, we have a candidate for sheriff, a Libertarian candidate for sheriff. His name's Darren Hill, and he's fantastic on gun rights, red flag laws. He's against them in full. But there is also a Republican running in the race. And both of these men had agreed to debate. The Republican candidate had agreed to debate. Then the debate got called off. Why? The Republican Party forbid their candidate from debating. The candidate wanted to, but the party forbid him. Can you imagine the nerve? So you, as the general public, you don't, it's not good for us for you to see our candidate debate. There ought to be public outrage about this. And I bet you the same thing's going to happen in my race. If you don't know, I'm running for town council of Castle Rock, and I have a Republican opponent. Also have an independent, but she's basically a progressive. Now, it is a nonpartisan race, and we're going to get into this a little bit more because the Republican Party here immediately took it partisan. But I bet you they're not going to allow him to debate me. So, back to the original point. So this candidate calls my husband and asks them to withdraw the candidate. That is, again, insane, presumptuous, entitled, like every kind of pejorative I can throw at it. But Wayne is much more politic and much more diplomatic than I am, because to me, to the question of, oh, can you withdraw your candidate would be, yeah, can you take a long walk off a short pier? How about that? Cash me outside, But anyway, he explained to this Republican candidate that it is a myth that the Libertarians draw votes away from the Republicans. Again, that's an entirely entitled, mindset as it is. Nobody owns anyone else's votes. And I'm going to get into some actual statistics on this sort of thing. But in general, and this kind of holds true for all third parties, because there's a certain type of mindset of person that will get involved in a third party to begin with. And because it's brutal, and you've got to really be ideologically committed. But more than half of libertarians who vote in an election for a libertarian candidate, about 60%, if there wasn't a libertarian candidate in that race, wouldn't vote at all. And then of the remaining 40%, it probably skews 25% to 15%, with 25% say they would have voted for the Republican and 15% that they would have voted for the Democrat. So, even when we beat the spread, most of the people that are part of that number wouldn't have voted if not for a libertarian. Libertarians are fiercely libertarian. So it isn't like, oh, we just withdraw a candidate and all of a sudden you're going to get more votes. And there are votes. This is just happens every time. So when Wayne explained this, then this candidate goes, oh, I have a different strategy. It's like, what does that have to do with us? Go do your strategy in your own little hidey holes. But was like, why don't we work together to draw more votes away from the Democrats? When did it become we? Throughout the country, the Republican Party totally rams through, and the Democrats do it too for the parties that they find a threat to them, ballot access restrictions. And we're going to play nice. Now, I know in Colorado we don't have those ballot access restrictions, but we had a fight for that. But throughout the country, yes, Republicans consistently try to keep libertarians off the ballots. I wish Wayne had said, you know what? I've got a different strategy. How about you withdraw and get behind the libertarian? Oh, all of a sudden that's offensive now, is it? Then you know how we feel. But when did it become we? And what makes you think that the libertarians automatically want the Republican to win, that quote unquote we would team up? I just cannot even imagine. But you want to know what this is going to segue into an advertisement. Something that fosters this sort of mindset is the first past the post voting system that we have, and that is why we need voting reform. And one type of voting reform would be approval voting. Approval voting moves us beyond two-party thinking. It leads to fewer spoilers because voters can vote for both a candidate that they really like, who has no chance of winning, and also a more popular candidate who does have a chance of winning. It's probably stop the phone calls to get us to withdraw our candidates. Nope, not today, Satan. It will also lead to more civility. When a group of friends want to stay friends and are trying to decide on something such as a restaurant or movie, they use a show of hands, which is approval voting. Also, it'll lead to less polarization because the voter is not forced to focus on only two candidates. Again, approval voting moves us beyond two-party thinking. You can contact Colorado's approval voting effort by phone or text at 720-439-6000. Tell Frank Atwood I said hello. All righty, let's continue with my tale here. So, yeah, no, we're not going to partner with you to make sure the Democrat loses. We are going to be libertarian, and we're going to earn as many votes as we can. While we might agree with the Republicans on some things, we also agree with the Democrats on some things, and we disagree with both of them on more things than I can count. Stop assuming that libertarians are just, as the cliche goes, that libertarians are just Republicans who smoke pot. Most libertarians I know don't smoke pot. I know more Republicans that smoke pot. But no, I don't think you understand what we really believe. And no, we're not going away. And as a former chair, and it's a former Libertarian Party chair that I don't particularly care for nowadays, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. As he said in an interview at Reason Magazine, your tears are delicious and your party will die. All right, welcome back. So now I'm going to back up some of the assertions that I had made. It's certainly true of the Libertarian Party, how votes would break down if there wasn't a Libertarian on the ticket. But this just holds true for third parties in general. And I'm going to give you some proof. We're going to be reading from an article in Ballot Access News. If you really want to get infuriated by actual voting suppression, you need to become informed about the ballot censorship that goes on in our country. This newsletter, you can find it on, you can't find the actual entire newsletter online, but the subscription is super cheap. Richard Winger is a ballot access expert. He is an absolute gem. He is a libertarian, but he helps third party. He helps anybody with ballot access, and the amount of knowledge he has is absolutely fantastic. He's not a sponsor of this show, but I'm promoting his newsletter anyway. I've been a subscriber forever. It's $18 a year. You get a newsletter a month. This is only part of it. It's more pages than this. I just kept the pages that I needed, but you can look him up online, or let's see here. You could go, I'm trying to look for his email address here, richardwinger@yahoo.com. All right, so we're going to read this column, and it talks about how it starts off, the context is that the North Carolina Green Party ended up winning a ballot access case. But he then goes on just to talk historically about the phenomenon I had mentioned. So the subtitle here is Democrats Hurt Themselves by Appearing to Favor Monopoly. Now he's mentioning the Democrats here because, again, this particular issue had to do with the Green Party. But if this was the Libertarian Party, the title would have been Republicans. Those of you who are conservative, which I know is most of the audience listening here, don't go pat yourself on the back because this one just happens to be slamming the Democrats. You could easily insert Republican Party in here. Okay, so I read. The leading election law attorney for the National Democratic Party is Mark Elias. He obviously believes in keeping the Green Party off the ballot in states in which the election is perceived to be close. Again, this could just as easily be the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party. Remember that tweet I read a few weeks ago where this complete bad person in Texas. And by the way, the Texas Libertarian Party won its ballot access case, but he had basically tweeted that he would start giving to his local GOP once they abandoned their dereliction of duty and not keeping libertarians off the ballot. Insane. Okay. Under his leadership, the Democratic Party kept the Green Party off the ballot in Montana in both 2018 and 2020. Oh, you're just such a big man, aren't you? Keeping people from having other choices. God, this gets me so angry. Also, under his leadership, the Democratic Party kept the Green Party's presidential candidate off the ballot in 2020 in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. How do you sleep at night? Ironically, there is considerable evidence that the presence of left political parties or independent candidates does not hurt the Democratic Party. Or if it does, the number of votes the Democratic Party loses is much smaller than Democratic leaders believe. And again, the same thing holds true. We're going to get to some generalizations in a moment. This is going to deal specifically with statistics regarding the Democratic Party and the Green Party. But again, as I said, it holds true across the board. Okay, 1. The 2016 exit polls show that voters who voted for Jill Stein, when asked whom they would have voted for if they couldn't vote for Stein, were not a source of many potential votes for Hillary Clinton. The exit poll results were 25% of the Stein voters would have voted for Clinton, 11% would have voted for Donald Trump, and 61% would not have voted or would have voted for another minor party candidate. And that's right along the same type of statistics that I had said before. Now, I have to tell you, I knew that was true for the Libertarian Party, but I was surprised to learn that was true for the Green Party. I just don't imagine Green Party supporters who say they would have voted for Donald Trump in 2016. But then again, there are Republicans who find it unfathomable that there are a non-insignificant number of libertarians who, if there weren't a libertarian on the ballot, would vote for a Democratic candidate. I'm part of the ones who would not vote if there wasn't a libertarian. The closest margin in 2016 in any state carried by Donald Trump was Michigan. Trump won by 10,704 votes. Jill Stein received 51,463 votes in Michigan. Applying the exit poll results to Michigan would mean that Clinton would have received a net gain of 14% from the Stein voters. Applying 14% to the Stein Michigan total equals 7,205 votes. So Trump would have still carried Michigan. Even if he hadn't, he still would have won the election. Furthermore, if the Democratic Party had tried to remove Stein from the ballot in Michigan or any other state, that would have engendered bad publicity for the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign and probably lost some votes for Clinton. So I think this is kind of a classic example of when you fear something, and I had said this in one of my YouTube shows earlier tonight, when you fear something and you struggle against it, it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that you end up enabling because you end up inflaming the very thing you're trying to avoid. It's also known as the Streisand effect. I'm going to stop here for a moment for a little bit of an ad break. Are you in the market to buy or sell your home? I would hope that you would consider a liberty-loving realtor that I can vouch for in the highest terms, and that we were just talking about last segment, my husband, Wayne Harlos. He's of the Harlos real estate team. He owns the Metro Brokers in downtown Castle Rock. We have shared a home office for years, and in that time I had seen him take the utmost time and care with every client. Now, I've been involved in several real estate transactions in my life, and I can tell you that never did my realtor take the time and care that Wayne takes with his clients, no matter the dollar value. In fact, my experience has been that particularly if you're a first-time home buyer or seller, and even more so if you're in the lower price range of the market, that realtors have bigger fish to fry and they spend the least amount of time with you as possible. That's not how Wayne operates. This is actually a labor of love for him, and he likes educating people. In fact, sometimes he takes so much time and care that I get a little jealous. Getting a good and caring realtor is one of the most important decisions you can make. So if you are in the market, please do consider giving Wayne a call at 303-229-3435 or emailing him at wayne@harlosrealestate.com. Super, super appreciate it. Okay, let's continue to subpoint 2. In 2004, the Washington Post featured a story in its October 22nd issue about polling as applied to independent candidate Ralph Nader. All three of the nation's 3 leading pollsters found that, to a slight extent, Nader's presence on the ballot helped George W. Bush. A slight majority of the voters who said they intended to vote for Nader said if they couldn't do that, they would vote for Bush over John Kerry. An analysis of the 2004 actual election returns bolsters that conclusion. In most of the 34 states in which Nader was on the ballot, his strongest percentage was in a county that was more pro-Bush than the state as a whole. Now we're moving to point 3. Respected pollster Samuel Lubell, who later in his life became a political scientist, found that in the 1948 presidential election, the presence of Progressive Party nominee Henry Wallace helped Harry Truman defeat the Republican nominee Thomas Dewey. His research is explained in his book, The Future of American Politics, published in 1950. Lubell found that whereas the Progressive Party cost Truman approximately 1 million votes, it caused 2 million voters to switch from their previous support of the Republican Party to Truman. Point number 4. A research psychologist, Dan Irely, reported in his book, Predictably Irrational, that if an individual is faced with 3 choices, and 2 of the choices are similar to each other, but one is clearly superior to the other in some way, the individual is less likely to choose the third dissimilar choice. Applying this to elections, if the Green Party and the Democratic Party both have a pro-environment message and the Republican Party doesn't, that would result in an assist to the Democrats. Now that seems very counterintuitive. The Democratic ticket would be seen as superior to the Green ticket because of the greater likelihood that the Democrat could win the election. A concrete example can be seen in the 1936 presidential election. The Communist Party presidential nominee for President Earl Browder campaigned vigorously in favor of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies. The Communist Party and Browder wanted Roosevelt to be reelected. To help, they intuited that having a second pro-New Deal candidate was good for the Democratic ticket. Although we now know that the 1936 election resulted in a landslide win for Roosevelt, no one before the election was held knew that. There was great suspense in the nation about who would win. The only poll conducted that year, the famous National Digest poll, predicted Republican nominee Alf Landon would win. All right, I will catch you on the other side of the break. Okay, welcome back. And now to continue a bit of my rant and my complaints about the Libertarian Party, not the Libertarian Party. I've got some complaints always about the Libertarian Party. What do libertarians hate the most besides government? Other libertarians. But no, anyway, my rant against the Republican Party right now. Now, some of this is going to have to do with my race. As you all know, I am running for town council in Castle Rock, and it is allegedly a nonpartisan race. Of course, you know, people who are members of political parties run in nonpartisan races, and really all that ultimately means is that your party label will not be on the ballot. But I do think there's a pretty strong tradition in races that are nonpartisan that you don't drag your party affiliation into it. You don't make it partisan. So the other day I was sitting at home and I get a text. And I'm like, interesting. I get these every once in a while that say something like, we're conducting a political opinion poll. Would you, in Colorado or in your area or in Castle Rock? I can't remember the exact wording of this one. And if you want to take it, just, hit the link. So I hit the link and it turned out it was a Castle Rock political survey. And I was like, interesting. And, at first asked some general questions about some hot button issues here in Castle Rock. And then it proceeded to ask about the District 3 elections. And I was kind of like weird on this. I'm like, is it going to go through all of the ones that are up for election? And I think there's more than 2 districts up for election. It's staggered terms. But anyway, I was like, well, I'm not in District 3, so is this survey even going to apply to me? And then it goes to District 5, which is the district I'm running in. And it's surreal because this is really my first real run for office. I was a line holder before for, I can't remember if it was State Senate or State House. It was State House. It was State House. And it's weird to, go on the next question on the survey. And it was like, if the election was today, because now there's 3 of us in the race, the ballot is set, who would you vote for? And to see my name there. So, of course, I said, definitely Harlos. But then it moved on. And it turns out, I've since learned, that this is something called a push poll. Thank you, my friend JJ, for letting me know that. Because I had, and I think originally the term meant something negative, that it meant it was a type of smear campaign where there would be questions disguised as a poll, but that were worded in such a way to make you think negatively of a certain candidate. So this wasn't that. It's almost the opposite. It's to get you to think positively, but the underlying thought is still the same. It's not really a poll. Nobody's gathering data for an objective purpose. It was a campaign ad for one of the people running in the race, disguised as an opinion poll. And I have to tell you, I felt really tricked. I got a huge bad taste in my mouth. And I like this other candidate. It's Max Brooks in Castle Rock. I don't know whether he approved this or don't know, because he's a nice guy, as to how it would appear to someone who's like, you know what, you're taking my time and enticed me to click on this link. And this was paid for and sponsored by the Republican Party, I'm sure. Not him personally, someone advocating for him. But, I'm sitting at home with very limited time in my evenings. You enticed me to take this poll under the guise that it really cared about my opinion, not to go see an ad for a candidate. But anyway, so the next poll question was, are you aware that Max Brooks is the only Republican in this race? And I'm like, what? This is a nonpartisan race. And you immediately go to partisanship in this very divided country. But, okay, did you know that Karen Ann Harlos is the only one with pink hair in this race? I mean, who cares? We have a conservative town council right now of alleged Republicans that shoved through 4 tax increases last year. So give me a flippin' break. But anyway, did you know? I'm like, well, I knew, but okay. And one of the option was, don't care. Way to get all partisan. And then the rest of the quote-unquote opinion poll questions were basically just asking you, are you aware that Max Brooks's position is X? It's not an opinion poll. It was an advertisement, and you're tricking people with this. And if you learned of this, Max, you got it. It's not good. Not a good look at all. But what I found really surprising, because one of the things that was a bee under my bonnet last time, and this might be going on in your community as well, is this big push to create more parks in Castle Rock. We've got so many parks, it's not even funny. But the fact is, that is not a proper purpose of government. If you're going to have a government, it needs to be limited to freeing people. So, protecting their rights, police perhaps, fire perhaps, on a national scale, military. It's not for things like parks or public art. Like, we spend so much money on that in Castle Rock. And I had recently found out about Heritage Park that used to be in Castle Rock, which was land that was bought by a bunch of civic-minded private citizens that then put it to public use. There are other ways to fund nice things if people really want them. But anyway, one of the things was, were you aware that Max Brooks said that he would find funding for, and it named the park? I'm like, find funding? From where? My pocket? But that was just super frustrating. Okay, but moving away from my rants against the Republican Party of Colorado, let me tell you something about a candidate more up in this neck of the woods that makes me smile. Fire is a danger to us all. It threatens our homes, our schools, and our livelihoods. There is a way to provide more funding to our local firefighters without raising taxes on Coloradans. Federal money is given every year to Colorado. 25% is meant to support our local fire authorities, but due to omissions in state law, our firefighters are left out of this funding. Our legislatures need to be focused on finding the problems in our laws like this that need to be fixed, not layering more bad laws on top of broken ones. Our government wouldn't have to keep running back to the people asking for a tax increase if they spent our money better to begin with. Send Daniel Lutz, L-U-T-Z, to Denver, and he will continue to work to bring our spending under control. He knows that's your money, not the government's, and he will treat it that way. For more information, visit his website at www.lutz4for and then the numbers 49.org. This was paid for by the committee to elect Daniel Lutz to House District 49. Okay, now moving from beyond local politics, and since I'm an equal opportunity ranter, let's rant against some of the barking moonbats on the left as well. With these, I just get these absolutely, again, insane barking moonbat emails from moveon.org. And this is just, so the title, and this is a little bit old, this is back from July, but I saved this to talk about. 157 House Republicans just voted against interracial marriage. Now, did they? Is that a really accurate headline? I think not. So let me read this to you. Dear Move On member, I'm not a member, I just got your emails for the laughs. On Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives voted on a bill that would codify both same-sex and interracial marriage into federal law. 157 Republicans voted against it. Oh, so they didn't vote against interracial marriage, they voted against codifying it in federal law. I wonder why. Is it because they're a bunch of racists who think like race mixing bad? Or is it that they don't think that's the job of the federal government? We can't be fair here, can we? It says the bill was written explicitly to combat the clarion call made by Clarence Thomas in the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, that Supreme Court decisions about LGBTQ plus marriage, access to contraception, and consensual relationships between LGBTQ plus people should be overturned as well. And the reason was not any kind of bigotry, not because they want to keep women barefoot and pregnant. I may have my own feels about these types of laws, but it's due to his conviction, which I'm not going to doubt, that this isn't a constitutional issue, it isn't a federal issue. Now, I've argued against this in another show, so this isn't even like I share the position of Clarence Thomas, but I do believe in being fair. It says, and 157 Republicans, including would-be Speaker of the House, Kenneth McCarthy, God, what a name to have when you're in Congress, voted against protecting the equal rights of Americans. We simply cannot allow a party fueled by bigotry, racism, and hatred. My God, woo, barking moonbat, to control our government. Oh, so it's a fundraiser here, but that is just insane. So it goes on to say, the Republicans have shown us who they are. Refusing to believe them would be a death sentence for our democracy. I'm surprised these talking points weren't used by Dark Brandon in that creepy, standing in front of a blood red background surrounded by military speech. It says they will pass a federal abortion ban. Will they now? They will ban contraception. How? The reasoning behind all of this is that this isn't a federal issue. And they were talking about federal legislatures here. Now, if you're going to say in some backwoods area of some state, some ultra conservatives might try that, maybe. But methinks you're just pushing the panic button to fuel up outrage. They will outlaw LGBTQ plus marriage. Well, marriage shouldn't be a function of the government at all, but it's not a function of the federal government. I mean, I get that argument. They will overturn Loving versus Virginia. Slander much? My God. Oh, they will pass draconian voter suppression laws. Oh, like the voter suppression laws that you support to keep Green Party candidates off the ballot that we just did all that reading over. Whenever I hear Democrats screaming about voter suppression laws, I'm like, pot, meat, kettle. Well, all right, after all of this just gets into the fundamental problem that I've talked about multiple times. So I complained about the right, I complained about the left, but the ultimate problem is the gun on the table. And the gun on the table is government force. If there wasn't this just stray weapon that we have to fight over, because if we don't pick it up, the other guy will. If that power wasn't even on the table, if that wasn't something that was just generally accepted and taken as a given, these problems would clear up. So along those lines, and I know this is my hobby horse, but here's a fantastic book from a University of Colorado Boulder campus professor, Michael Huemer. Fantastic book called The Problem of Political Authority. And there's something in here that I would like to read you guys. And it is what the book starts out with, which is entitled, the main chapter title is The Problem of Political Authority, which is the same title of the book, but with the subtitle of A Political Parable. Let us begin with a short political story. You live in a small village with a crime problem. Vandals roam the village, stealing and destroying people's property. No one seems to be doing anything about it. So one day, you and your family decide to put a stop to it. You take your guns and go looking for vandals. Periodically, you catch one, take him back to your house at gunpoint, and lock him in the basement. You provide the prisoners with food so they don't starve, but you plan on keeping them locked in the basement for a few years to teach them a lesson. After operating this way for a few weeks, you decide to make the rounds of the neighborhood, starting with your next-door neighbor. As he answers the door, you ask, "Have you noticed a reduction in crime in the last few weeks?" He nods. "Well, that's thanks to me." You explain your anti-crime program. Noting the wary look on your neighbor's face, you continue. "Anyway, I'm here because it's time to collect your contribution to the Crime Prevention Fund. Your bill for the month is $100. As your neighbor stares at you, making no apparent move to hand over the money. You patiently explain that, should he refuse to make the required payment, you will unfortunately have to label him a criminal, at which point he will be subject to long-term confinement in your basement, along with the aforementioned vandals. Indicating the pistol at your hip, you note that you are prepared to take him by force if necessary. Supposing that you take this tack with all of your neighbors, what sort of reception could you expect? Would most cheerfully give over their assigned share of the costs of your crime prevention? Not likely. In all probability, you would observe the following. First, almost none would agree that they owe you anything. While some may pay up for fear of imprisonment in your basement, and a few might pay up out of hostility toward the vandals, almost none would consider themselves duty-bound to do so. Those who refuse to pay would more likely be praised than condemned for standing up to you. Second, most would consider your actions outrageous. Your demands for payment would be condemned as naked extortion, and your confinement of those who refuse to pay as kidnapping. The very outrageousness of your conduct, combined with your deluded presumption that the rest of the village would recognize an obligation to support you, would cause many to question your sanity. What does this story have to do with political philosophy? In the story, you behaved like a rudimentary government. Though you did not take on all the functions of a typical modern state, you assumed two of its most central roles. You punished people who violated others' rights or disobeyed your commands, and you collected non-voluntary contributions to finance your activities. In the case of the government, these activities are referred to as the justice system and the tax system. In your case, they're referred to as kidnapping and extortion. But yet, on the face of it, your activities are of the same kind as those of a government. Yet, most people's evaluations of the government are far more lenient than their evaluations of you in this story. Most people support the state's imprisonment of criminals, feel obligated to pay their taxes, and consider punishment of tax evaders both desirable and within the rights of the state. This illustrates a general feature of our attitudes towards government. Governments are considered ethically permitted to do things that no non-governmental person or organization may do. At the same time, individuals are thought to have obligations to their governments that they would owe toward no non-governmental person or organization, even if non-governmental agents behaved similarly to a government. This is not simply a point about the law, nor is it about what sorts of actions one could get away with. The point is that our ethical judgments differentiate sharply between governmental and non-governmental actions. Acts that would be considered unjust or morally unacceptable when performed by non-governmental agents will often be considered perfectly all right, even praiseworthy, when performed by government agents. Why do we accord this special moral status to government, and are we justified in doing so? This is the problem of political authority. And if you really come to grips with that, it's a life-changing. Why do we? What is it about calling yourself government or putting on a special costume or sitting behind a fancy desk that gives you the authority to do something that you outside of that context would not? Because you call yourself government? Because you were elected? You weren't elected by everybody. How is that consent of the governed? How is it that the government has more rights or is beyond the ethics of the individual people that make it up? The problem of political authority is absolutely intractable. But let's move beyond that example. Say, for instance, that you do think that it is proper for government to do some basic things, like protection of the rights of people, and that, it's more effective that way, or it prevents greater harm from being done, and that it's worth it to pay a reasonable cost for that. Now, he goes on in this book to debunk that. But What about the belief that is often said, well, you have to obey the law, whether or not the law represents something that you would have an obligation to do, even if it wasn't the law? Because scofflaws, people who just wantonly disobey whatever laws, then cause a general attitude of scofflawery throughout society, and it could lead to the actual collapse of society. Therefore, you have a duty to obey all laws, regardless of their content. Now, Michael Humer gets into that as well, and this is what I would like to close on. I wrote an article expanding upon this a bit on my Substack. If you go over to Substack, my Substack is Karen Ann Harlos, but it's also entitled Pink Flame of Liberty, just like this show. So this is what Michael Humer says. Some would argue, even if a given law is not needed to carry out the government's central functions, obedience to that law is still part of the cost of providing essential government services, because disobedience risks bringing down the government and all social order. But if it were true, it would do as much to undermine content-independent political legitimacy as it would support content-independent political obligation. Presumably, if individuals are obligated to help maintain social order, the state itself is similarly obligated. If disobedience to any laws risk causing a collapse of social order, then the state, in making laws that are not necessary to maintaining social order and that are likely to be widely disobeyed, is itself threatening social order far more than a single individual who disobeys one of these laws. Furthermore, asking the state to renounce its desire to make such unnecessary laws is more reasonable and less onerous than asking an individual to renounce his personal liberties. Therefore, if one holds that the individual, nevertheless, must obey such laws when they're made, it's much clearer that the state cannot make such laws. Now, I found that also extremely profound. Even if I can convince you that the state should be teeny small, that right there it shows that it would be very content dependent, and 99% of what we have today would fail that test. Question authority, question the state, become ungovernable.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians, or choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business, not because they want to